The first thing I saw after dying was not light, darkness, fire, or some divine judge holding a book of my mistakes. It was a rectangle of cheap white paper taped to the corner of my bedroom mirror, the kind of paper our school office used when the printer toner was almost empty. At the top, in pale gray letters, it said Provincial Recommendation Examination Admission Slip, and underneath, in the row that had ruined my life once, it said Seat D19. I stopped breathing before I even understood that I had lungs again. My fingers were younger, thinner, unscarred by the paper cuts and detergent cracks from the photocopy shop where I had spent the last 4 years printing other girls' university applications after my own future had been buried under a cheating scandal. My hair was tied in the same loose braid I had worn at 17. My school blazer hung over the chair, its badge polished because my mother had done it for me the night before the exam. On the desk, my fountain pen waited beside a stack of review notes, so neat that my chest actually hurt looking at them. I had written those notes before I learned that hard work could be stolen without leaving fingerprints. Outside my door, my father coughed in the kitchen, alive. My mother hummed under her breath, alive. The calendar beside my bed showed the date I had carried like a curse. April 16th, the night before the exam that should have taken me to the Capital University. The night before Leora hand-copied from the desk that carried my number, smiled with tears in her eyes, and convinced everyone that I had been the thief. I stared at the admission slip until the words split and blurred. Then my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number I knew too well. Don't oversleep tomorrow, May. Some seats are luckier than others. My blood turned so cold that for 1 second I was back in that exam hall, hearing the scratch of her pencil behind me, smelling the sour perfume she wore when she pretended to be fragile, watching invigilators lift the board under my desk and pull out a folded answer strip I had never seen. In my first life, I had cried until my voice broke. In this life, I smiled before my tears could fall, because the heavens had not sent me back to suffer again. They had sent me back before midnight, while the seating portal was still open. In my first life, I believed the worst thing Leora took from me was my score, but disgrace has a way of spreading like spilled ink, soaking through every page it touches. The exam was not a normal school test. It was the provincial recommendation exam, the kind with cameras in the corners, sealed papers, numbered desks, and officials from outside the school because the top 20 scores received direct interviews for the capital's medical foundation program. For girls like Leora, whose mother chaired the parent council and whose uncle owned a tutoring chain, it was another trophy to place under glass. For me, it was the bridge out. My father drove a delivery van until his spine bent wrong. My mother sewed uniform hems for half the neighborhood, and every scholarship pamphlet I brought home was treated like a holy object. I had ranked first in every mock exam, not because I was a genius, but because I had learned how to make hunger useful. When other students slept, I revised. When other students bought prediction papers from private tutors, I borrowed discarded ones and solved the errors. Leora sat 2 desks behind me in class and called me admirable in front of teachers. In private, she called me a ladder. I did not understand then how accurate she was. A ladder does not complain when someone steps on it. The week before the exam, she began asking small, harmless questions. What brand of pencil did I use? Did I shade answers clockwise or straight? Was I superstitious about seat numbers? I laughed because I thought she was nervous. She laughed because she already knew my seat. D19, 4th column, 2nd row from the back, close enough to the side camera to appear safe, far enough from the chief invigilator to turn a wrist unnoticed. That was the seat she wanted me in. That was the desk she had prepared. The trap in my first life had been so simple that its cruelty was almost elegant. 3 days before the exam, the school held a hall inspection and allowed student volunteers to help wipe the desks. Leora volunteered with her little circle of soft-handed admirers, girls who floated around her like ribbons on a gift box. They wiped every desk except mine. Under the board of D19, fixed with transparent tape, so fine it looked like dried glue, they placed a folded answer strip copied from a leaked mock paper. It was not the real answer key, of course. Leora was never foolish enough to rely on fake answers. The strip existed for one reason, to be found. During the exam, She copied my working rhythm and enough of my answer pattern to keep her score close to mine. Then halfway through the final section, she dropped her pencil, bent down, and made the first little noise. Not loud. Just a small gasp, delicate as a teacup cracking. The side invigilator came. She pointed under my desk with trembling fingers. The hall froze. They found the strip. Leora started crying before anyone questioned her, which made her look innocent and made me look slow. She said she had seen me touching the underside before the exam. She said she did not want to accuse me because I was her friend. She said she was scared I would hate her. Every sentence was a hook baited with pity. I denied it. My voice shook. Hers shook better. The committee sealed my paper, voided my score, suspended me for investigation, and by the time they admitted that the strip did not match the real exam, the damage had already grown teeth. People said I had used an old key because I could not get the new one. People said my perfect grades had always been suspicious. Leora placed third. I was banned from applying for recommendation programs for 2 years. My father's delivery contract vanished after Leora's uncle complained that a dishonest family should not handle school supplies. My mother aged 10 years before summer ended. As for Leora, she sent me one message after the results. Don't blame me, May. You chose a very unlucky desk. I did not die dramatically. That is something revenge stories never tell properly. They make ruin look like thunder, but sometimes it is a slow drizzle that gets into your bones until one day you cannot remember what dry warmth feels like. I lived through the accusation, the whispers, the appeal hearing where adults stared at the folder instead of my face, the principal's careful apology that apologized for confusion without naming who had caused it. I lived through my father selling his van, my mother refusing to buy medicine because fees for my ordinary entrance exam still had to be paid, Leora's interview photo on the school banner, her white dress glowing under the caption integrity, excellence, compassion. I entered a lower college, dropped out when my father needed surgery, and took work at a photocopy shop near the district court. Lawyers came in with evidence bundles. Students came in with thesis drafts. Mothers came in with birth certificates. I printed proof for everyone except myself. On the day I died, rain had turned the street silver. I was crossing with a stack of exam prep booklets wrapped in plastic when the old sign above the shop tore loose in the wind. There was pain, yes, but the sharper thing was the absurdity of seeing the booklets scatter across the pavement, all those blank answer sheets skidding into puddles. My last thought was not noble. It was not forgiveness. It was this. If I could go back, I would not try to prove my innocence after the knife entered. I would move before the hand lifted. So when I woke at 17 with D19 glowing from the slip on my mirror, I did not scream. Screaming wastes air, and I had been given air for a purpose. I picked up my phone and checked the time. 11:37 p.m. The seating correction portal closed at midnight. In my first life, our homeroom teacher had mentioned it casually 2 days earlier, saying only students with verified conflicts could request changes, and none of us paid attention because exam seats were supposed to be fixed. But I remembered everything now, including the tiny gray button beneath the admission form that said correction request. My fingers moved before my fear did. I logged in with my student number, answered the security questions, and opened a reason box. I could not write, "A poisonous girl has planted a cheating strip under my desk and plans to turn my life into ash." The system wanted clean reasons, not prophecy. I selected printing error in personal details, then uploaded a photo of my admission slip where the barcode had printed with a faint gap through the middle. That gap had existed in my first life too. I had ignored it because the hall scanner still accepted it, but rules were rules, and rules become weapons when used before corrupt people notice. In the comment box, I wrote that the barcode line was incomplete and requested a reissued admission slip to avoid entry delays. The system spun. My heart hammered against my ribs. In the kitchen, my mother laughed softly at something my father said, and the sound almost broke me. At 11:43 p.m., the page refreshed. Request accepted. New seat allocation generated. B07. I stared at it until I believed it. B07 was near the front, beside the aisle, directly under the center camera, nowhere near D19. It was not a lucky seat. It was a visible one. Visibility, I had learned too late, is the closest thing poor people have to protection. Changing the seat was only the first stitch. If I merely moved, Leora might improvise. She was not brilliant in the way people called her brilliant. She was brilliant in the way mold is brilliant, spreading toward any damp weakness. I needed her to commit to the old plans so completely that when it collapsed, she could not crawl out by crying. I printed the new admission slip, folded it, and placed it inside the lining of my blazer where no one would look. Then I took the old slip from the mirror, photographed it clearly, and left it exactly where it had been. I replied to her message after 10 full minutes, because in my first life I had always replied too quickly, eager to keep peace with girls who mistook kindness for begging. Thanks, I wrote. D19 better be lucky. Her answer arrived instantly, it will be. I imagined her smiling at her screen, thinking I was still walking into the box she had built. Then I opened another browser tab and wrote an email to the Provincial Examination Integrity Office. I did not accuse Leora by name yet. A direct accusation from a student at midnight would look unstable. Instead, I wrote that during hall cleaning I had noticed irregular transparent tape beneath desk D19, but had been afraid to touch it before the exam. I wrote that I was concerned someone might have planted prohibited material under a numbered desk. I attached no photo because I had none. I asked them not to alert the school in advance, because if the material existed, the person responsible might remove it. Then I scheduled the email to send at 6:10 a.m. after the external officials would be awake, but before students entered the hall. In my first life, I had learned the names of the adults who destroyed me. In this life, I intended to learn the names of the adults who could not pretend they had not been warned. Sleep did not come. I lay on my back while the house breathed around me, rebuilding the battlefield in my mind. In the first life, Leora's trap had required 3 protections: my ignorance, her innocence, and the school's embarrassment. Remove one, and the plan might wobble. Remove all 3, and it would fall on her. At 4:20 a.m., I got up and opened the drawer where I kept my old MP3 recorder, the one I used for language practice. It was small, ugly, and reliable. I charged it, tested it, and tucked it into the inner pocket of my pencil case, not to record the exam content, which would be illegal, but to record the corridor before entry, where girls said things they later forgot. At 5:30, my mother knocked and came in with warm milk. She saw me sitting fully dressed and smiled with tired pride. Nervous? She asked. My throat tightened around years she did not know she had already lived. In my first life, I had snapped at her that morning because fear made me sharp. She had looked wounded but kissed my forehead anyway. That memory hit harder than death. This time I stood and hugged her so suddenly that milk sloshed onto the saucer. She laughed, confused, and patted my back. It's only an exam, little moon. Only an exam. I wanted to tell her that by sunset our family name would either survive or start bleeding. Instead, I said, whatever happens today, please believe me first. Her hand stilled. She drew back and looked at my face properly. My mother had spent her life reading stitches, fabric tension, people's hems. She knew when something had been pulled too tight. I will, she said, no joke in her voice. But May, what will happen? I smiled because the answer was too large for the kitchen. Someone will try to borrow my luck, I said. I'm going to let her return it with interest. The school gates looked smaller than they had in my nightmares. That was my first surprise. I had spent years remembering them as iron jaws, black bars swallowing me whole, but in morning light they were only gates, chipped at the hinges, with posters taped crookedly to the wall. Students clustered outside in nervous packs, comparing pencils, pretending not to compare ranks. Parents hovered with water bottles and advice. Leora arrived at 7:18 in a cream cardigan over her uniform, hair curled at the ends, eyes soft with rehearsed worry. She looked exactly as she had in the photo on the integrity banner, which made me understand something important. Masks do not become faces just because everyone applauds them. Her mother, Madame Han, stepped out of the car behind her, wearing a pearl brooch shaped like a swan. In my first life, that brooch had flashed under the hearing room lights while she said the school must protect honest students from dangerous pressure. Now she glanced at me, smiled with the shallow warmth reserved for servants' children, and touched Leora's shoulder. Leora came toward me alone. "May," she said, and her voice was honey poured over glass. "Did you sleep? You look pale." I gave her the old version of myself. Polite, anxious, grateful for attention. I barely slept. Her gaze flicked to my bag, my pencil case, my empty hands. "You brought your admission slip, right?" "Of course," I said.
Dès 19.
I checked 10 times. A tiny spark passed through her eyes. Satisfaction. There it was, alive and stupid. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Don't worry. I'll be near you. If anything happens, I'll help." Behind her, one of her friends, Yuna, turned away too fast. My recorder hidden in my pencil case caught the sentence. "If anything happens." Not good luck, not you'll do well. If anything happens. Some phrases are fingerprints. The second surprise came from an unexpected place. My homeroom teacher, Mr. Kai. In my first life, I had hated him because he did not defend me. He had stood behind the committee table, rubbing his thumb against his wedding ring, saying only that he had never known me to be dishonest, but pressure changes children. That sentence had followed me for years. Pressure changes children. This morning, he stopped me before the hall entry line and said, "May, wait." I almost flinched. He held out a sealed envelope. The office printed replacement slips for anyone with barcode issues. "Yours came through late last night. Did you know?" For one cold breath, I wondered if the trap had already shifted, if someone had informed Leora. Then I saw his face. He was not suspicious. He was irritated at administration. "The external registrar asked me to hand it to you directly," he continued. "Use the new one. Old slip is invalid." His voice was loud enough for nearby students to hear. Leora heard it. Her head turned so sharply one curl sprang loose. I took the envelope, thanked him, and opened it with deliberately clumsy fingers. B07. Black ink, clean barcode, official stamp. Leora's face did not change for the crowd, but I watched the blood drain from the skin beneath her powder. Pattern interruption 1. The rabbit had stepped out of the snare and was holding the map. She recovered quickly, too quickly. "Oh," she said, smiling. "That's good, right? Front seats are better for focus." "Maybe," I said, but I was getting attached to D19. Her laugh came half a second late. That half second was the sound of her plan cracking. A weaker person might have abandoned the trap then. Leora did not, which was why I had needed the integrity office, not just a seat change. She excused herself to fix her hair and hurried toward the side corridor where volunteers had stacked water bottles. I followed at a distance, not close enough to be obvious, close enough for the recorder in my open pencil case to catch raised whispers. Yuna was waiting near the notice board, biting her thumbnail. "She changed seats," Leora hissed. "What?" B07. "The office changed it." "Then leave it. Don't do anything." That was Yuna, cowardly but not monstrous. Leora's reply was soft, and softness made it worse. "Are you insane? The strip is under D19. If they find it and she isn't sitting there, who do you think they'll ask?" "No one saw us. People always see after they're told where to look." A pause. Shoes scuffed. Then Leora said the sentence that proved she was not panicking blindly. She was choosing. "I'll sit close enough. If D19 is empty, I'll say she asked me to check it before the exam, because she was scared. If someone else sits there, I'll act like I noticed by accident. Either way, she touched it first in everyone's mind." My hand tightened around my pencil case until the plastic edge bit my palm. In my first life, I had spent years wondering whether she had ever felt guilty. There, in the corridor, I received my answer. Guilt requires seeing another person as real. To Leora, I was still only a surface on which her future could be written. At 7:52, the external officials entered the hall. Students straightened as if posture could improve memory. The chief invigilator was not the sleepy local teacher from my first life. She was a woman in a navy suit with silver hair pulled into a knot, and when she scanned the room, even the dust seemed to organize itself. Her name tag read Inspector Vale. I knew that name. Not from school, but from the appeal files I had printed years later at the photocopy shop. Vale had led the crackdown on recommendation exam fraud after a scandal in another district. In my first life, she must not have been assigned to our hall until later, after my case was already buried. My email had changed more than a desk. It had summoned someone who knew what rot smelled like. She spoke before allowing us in. No student will touch a desk until instructed. Admission slips will be checked against desk cards and registry records. If you notice anything unusual, raise your hand. If you conceal anything unusual, you become part of it. Her eyes passed over us and stopped, just for a breath, on Leora. Leora lowered her lashes like a saint in a painting. I almost admired the discipline. Almost. Then the doors opened. B07 was near the front, second desk from the aisle. D19 sat far behind me, empty for the moment, a square of wood under the side camera. I did not look at it too long. Predators notice attention. I took my seat, placed my pencils parallel, and folded my hands. My heartbeat was not calm, but it was mine. In my first life, I had entered D19 like a lamb. In this life, I sat beneath the camera and let the old desk wait for its true owner. The hall filled with small human noises, chair legs scraping, zippers opening, nervous coughs, the dry flutter of admission slips. Then the third surprise landed. A boy named Ren, who had ranked 10th and never spoken unless spoken to, stopped at D19 holding his slip with visible confusion. "Inspector," he called. "My desk card says D19, but my slip says D20. Every head turned. Leora's pencil rolled off her desk. Inspector Vale walked over, checked the registry tablet, and said, "Your assigned seat is D20. D19 is temporarily withheld." Temporarily withheld. The phrase moved through the hall like a draft. Leora's hand trembled as she retrieved her pencil. Temporarily withheld meant the desk had been flagged. It also meant my email had been read. Vale lifted the desk card from D19, examined the underside without bending too obviously, and placed a small red seal across the front corner. She did not remove whatever had been planted. She did something far better. She turned the desk into bait everyone could see without understanding. Then she announced, "D19 will remain unused. No student is to approach it." My skin prickled. In my first life, the strip under that desk had been discovered as evidence against me. In this life, the same strip had become evidence waiting for the person who could not resist it. Leora stared at the red seal as if it had insulted her family. For the first time that morning, her mask slipped not into fear but anger. It was quick, ugly, and gone.
I saw it.
So did Inspector Vale. The exam began at 8:30. The sealed papers were distributed face down. Do not turn over until instructed. My hands rested on the booklet. I could feel the difference before seeing it. Thicker paper, official print, the faint chemical smell of ink. In the first life, I had been too terrified to remember the questions clearly after the accusation, but some things had branded themselves into me. The long passage about river management. The combinatorics problem with seating arrangements, bitterly funny now. The biology case study on inherited clotting disorders. The essay prompt about public trust. I had solved these once under pressure, then again in memory for years, punishing myself with answers no one would grade. When Vale said begin, I turned the page and moved. Not rushed. Not theatrical.
Clean.
Every few minutes, my mind tried to look back toward D19, but I trained it forward. Revenge is still a distraction if you stare at it too long. At 9:12, someone coughed twice behind me. At 9:18, a pencil dropped. At 9:21, the side camera clicked as it adjusted focus. I did not turn. Then I heard the faintest scrape, not of a chair, but of fingernails under wood. My pulse kicked.
There are sounds you do not forget.
In my first life, just before Leora gasped, there had been that same small scrape behind me. This time no gasp came. Instead, silence thickened around the back rows. Leora was reading the underside of a forbidden desk during a live provincial exam because greed had convinced her that rules were scenery meant for poorer people. Here is the part no one outside an exam hall understands. Cheating is not smooth. Movies make it look like quick glances and clever signals, but real cheating has a smell, a rhythm, a desperation that interrupts the air. Honest students breathe with the paper. Cheaters breathe with their fear. From B07, I could not see Leora directly without turning, but I could hear the rhythm change. Scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. Eraser dust brushed too quickly. A chair shifted half an inch. Inspector Vale walked down the center aisle, unhurried, her shoes soft against the floor. She did not pounce. She let the exam continue. That patience frightened me more than shouting would have. At 9:40, I reached the logic section and saw the question that had destroyed Leora without her knowing it. Question 38 asked students to identify the flaw in a circular argument. I almost laughed. Leora, who had built a circle of lies around my old seat, was now trapped inside one. She had expected to copy a planted strip that would later be blamed on me. She did not know the integrity officers had replaced that strip at 8:05 with a decoy bearing their invisible mark, a decoy answer sequence designed not to match any version of the exam. I learned that detail later, but in the hall I understood enough from Vale's stillness. The desk was no longer Leora's weapon. It was an official mirror. Every answer she copied from it reflected only her intent. Then came the pattern interruption that nearly made me ruin everything by reacting. At 10:05, Leora raised her hand. Not high, not frantic, just enough to summon the young side invigilator instead of Inspector Vale. My eraser fell, she whispered. May I pick it up? The invigilator nodded, foolishly, and Leora bent. For 1 second, her face appeared in the side reflection of the polished window near my row. I saw her eyes, wide and bright, not with fear but calculation. She was not simply copying the decoy. She was checking whether the planted strip still looked untouched, so she could accuse me afterward. She planned to survive even the flagged desk by claiming concern. My stomach tightened. If she managed to create a scene before the exam ended, emotions might muddy the record again. I forced myself to keep writing. Vale moved at the exact moment Leora's fingers slid under the desk edge. Candidate D18, Vale said, calm as a closing door. Leora froze. D18 was her actual seat, close enough to the withheld D19 for her to reach when she leaned. Vale did not ask what she was doing. Questions give liars room. Instead, she placed a blank incident card on Leora's desk and said, Continue your exam. Your movement has been recorded. Leora's face went white. The hall heard every word.
No accusation.
No drama. Just recorded. It was the most beautiful sentence I had heard in 2 lifetimes. By the final half hour, the hall had split into 2 worlds. In the front, pages turned, pencils moved, students fought their own battles with time. In the back, Leora sat so stiffly that even from the corner of my eye she looked carved. She had 3 choices now: abandon the decoy answers and salvage what she could, expose the strip and try to blame me, or continue copying because pride could not accept a fall without dragging someone else down.
Il y aura chose pride.
I knew she would. Pride had fed her all her life. She would not recognize poison in its mouth. She shaded more circles. Too many, too confidently after too much panic. I finished with 11 minutes left and used the time to check my work, not because I needed perfection for revenge, but because I had forgotten how it felt to care about my own future, without apology. Question 62 had a wording trick. I caught it. Question 71 required units. I wrote them. The essay prompt asked whether integrity was a personal virtue or a public system. In my first life, I would have written a balanced argument. In this life, my answer cut clean. Personal virtue matters, but systems decide whether virtue survives contact with power. I wrote about transparent procedures, independent oversight, documented evidence, and the danger of confusing tears with truth. My hand did not shake. When Vale called time, I placed my pencil down and felt something inside me unclench for the first time since I had opened my eyes beneath that mirror. The exam was over. The real test was about to begin. Remain seated, Inspector Vale said. Usually those words make students groan, but no one moved. Two external officers entered through the side door with folders. Mr. Kai stood behind them, pale and sweating through his collar. Madame Han was visible through the hall window, speaking sharply to the principal, her pearl swan flashing like a small weapon. Vale collected papers row by row herself. When she reached B07, she checked my answer sheet number against my slip, stamped it, and moved on without expression. When she reached D18, she paused. Candidate Leora Han, she said. Leora looked up with a trembling smile so perfect it deserved applause. Yes, Inspector? Before your paper is collected, state for the record whether you observed any irregular material near your assigned desk. There was a bridge offered over a pit. Leora could step back. She could say yes. She noticed the withheld desk and foolishly looked. She could take a smaller punishment. For one heartbeat, I thought fear might make her honest. Then her eyes flicked toward me. Not at my face. At my new seat number. Hatred sharpened her mouth. I was afraid to say anything during the exam, she said, voice breaking on cue. But before we began, Maylin looked very nervous about D19. She told me last night it was her seat. I think she knew something was under it. A murmur broke through the hall. My name moved from mouth to mouth, lighter this time because it had not yet become a verdict. In my first life, that murmur had swallowed me. In this life, I sat still. Inspector Vale did not look at me immediately. That was how I knew she was good. Bad investigators chased the name thrown at them. Good ones watched the thrower. You are stating that candidate Maylin had knowledge of material under D19? Yes, Leora whispered. Tears gathered, obedient as trained birds. She seemed scared. I didn't want to hurt her, but I can't lie. I almost admired the audacity of that sentence from a girl sitting with decoy answers drying on her sheet. Vale turned to me then. Candidate Maylin, did you communicate with candidate Han regarding D19? My voice came out clear. Yes, Inspector. She messaged me last night. I have the messages. Leora's tears paused. Tiny pause, tiny death. Vale nodded to an officer, who brought a plastic evidence tray. Phones had been sealed before entry, but mine was in the labeled bag with my name. Under supervision, I unlocked it. The messages appeared exactly as needed. Don't oversleep tomorrow, May. Some seats are luckier than others. My reply, D19 better be lucky. Her answer, it will be. Vale read them once, then asked, did you submit a seat correction request?
Yes.
At 11:41 p.m., because of a barcode printing defect. Approved at 11:43 p.m. New seat B07. Mr. Kai made a small sound, half relief, half horror. Leora's face changed again, from wounded innocence to something tight and trapped. She had prepared for my panic. She had not prepared for timestamps. Madame Han entered before she was invited. In my first life, adults had always entered rooms as if doors belonged to them. I had mistaken that confidence for authority. This time, I watched how Inspector Vale's eyes hardened. Parents are not permitted in the examination hall, Vale said. Madame Han smiled the way rich women smile at rules written by people they intend to replace. I am not merely a parent. I am Parent Council Chair, and I was asked by Principal Zhou to assist with student welfare. Principal Zhou, hovering behind her, looked like he wished the floor had mercy. My daughter is clearly distressed, Madame Han continued. These children are under immense pressure. We must be careful not to damage reputations over misunderstandings. Damage reputations. The phrase hit an old bruise. In my first life, she had said my reputation must be sacrificed to protect the exam's reputation. Now she wanted the exam softened to protect Leora's. Inspector Vale picked up the incident card from Leora's desk. Your daughter's welfare will be considered after the evidence is secured.
Madame Han smilatinat.
Evidence can be interpreted. Vale replied, video is less flexible than influence. The hall went so quiet I heard someone inhale. Pattern interruption too. The adult who should have bowed did not bow. Madame Han's eyes flashed toward me, and for the first time she saw not a poor student but a complication. I lowered my gaze, not in fear, but to hide how much I enjoyed her confusion. The officers lifted D19 in front of everyone. They did it carefully, photographing the red seal, the underside, the tape, the folded strip. One officer sprayed the paper with something from a small bottle, and pale blue markings appeared along the margin. Control decoy, Integrity Office, 805. Gasps jumped from row to row. Leora gripped her desk so hard her knuckles blanched. Inspector Vale explained for the record, not for drama. At 6:23 this morning, the Integrity Office received a report concerning possible prohibited material beneath desk D19. At 8:05, before candidates entered, officers documented and replaced the material with a marked decoy. Desk D19 was withheld. Any interaction with this desk after that time was unauthorized. The words were plain, but they landed like stones. Replace the material. Withheld. Unauthorized. Leora's story had required the strip to be mine. Now the strip belonged to the investigators. Her accusation had pointed not at me, but at the trap she had walked into after it was labeled danger. Vale then opened Leora's answer sheet and placed a transparent overlay above it. I did not know such overlays existed. Later, Ren told me his cousin in another province had seen them used for leak investigations. The overlay showed the decoy sequence. The match was not complete because Leora had known some answers and guessed others, but from question 31 onward, after the first scrape under D19, her wrong answers followed the decoy in clusters too neat to be coincidence. A desk had given her answers that no honest student could derive. She had copied wood and tape into her own downfall. Leora did not collapse. That would have been too honest. Instead, she transformed. The fragile girl vanished, and something harder stepped out wearing her face. "This is entrapment," she said. Her voice was no longer trembling. "You planted false material and waited for someone stressed to notice it. Any student might have looked." Inspector Vale's expression did not move. Any student might notice. Only one candidate repeatedly reached beneath a sealed, withheld desk and reproduced the decoy sequence. "Because May told me to check it." Leora snapped. There it was, the knife without ribbon. Every student in the hall saw it. Tears had not saved her, so she reached for force. She was supposed to sit there. She knew about it. She changed seats to frame me. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because lies panic when the room stops feeding them. Vale asked, "How did candidate May force you to copy answers from a desk she was not using?" The question hung there, clean and impossible. Leora opened her mouth. No sound came. Madame Han stepped forward. "My daughter is a minor. I demand this discussion continue privately." "It will," Vale said. "After all candidates who were detained as witnesses are dismissed row by row." Witnesses. Not classmates. Not gossipers. Witnesses. That word meant the story would not be buried in a closed office with tea and apologies. It had already grown official legs. We were dismissed 20 minutes later, but the corridor outside the hall felt like a second courtroom. Students who had spent years orbiting Leora now stood in broken clusters, whispering with their hands over their mouths. Some looked at me with guilt already forming, others with curiosity, as if I had performed a magic trick rather than survived an ambush. Yuna cried near the stairwell. I should have hated her most after Leora, because in both lives she had known enough to prevent harm. But when she saw me, she did something no one had done in the first life. She bowed so deeply her hair fell over her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She said it was just to scare you. She said the strip was fake and nobody would really be hurt." My anger rose hot, then cooled into something sharper. In my first life, I almost said, "That fake strip broke my father's back." Instead, I asked, "Did you help place it?" Yuna shook. "I held the cleaning bucket. I kept watch." "Then tell Inspector Vale that." Her head jerked up. Fear flooded her eyes. "Madame Han will destroy me." I leaned closer, not cruelly, but without softness. "Madame Han is busy trying not to be destroyed by her daughter. Choose quickly which version of yourself you want documented." It was not forgiveness.
It was an exit sign.
Whether she walked through it was her decision. Behind us, Leora's voice rose from the hall. no longer sweet, accusing everyone at once. For years I had imagined confronting her with a speech so perfect the world would clap. Reality was better. I did not need a speech. She was introducing herself. My parents arrived at 11:40 because Mr. Kai called them, and the sight of them running through the school gate nearly broke the armor I had built overnight. My father still wore his delivery jacket. My mother had flour on one sleeve from the breakfast buns she had been shaping when the call came. In my first life, they had arrived too late, after everyone had already heard that their daughter was a cheat. My mother had grabbed my hands and asked me privately, "Tell me you didn't," and even though I knew she wanted to believe me, the question had cut. This time she reached me and pulled me into her arms without asking anything. "I believe you," she said into my hair. 3 words. Whole years inside them. My father stood beside us, breathing hard, eyes red, looking past my shoulder toward the hall where officials were still moving. "Who?" he asked. 1 syllable, heavy as a hammer. I shook my head because I knew his anger would only feed people who loved calling poor fathers uncivilized. "The inspectors have it," I said. "Let them write it down." He looked at me then, really looked, and some of the fury turned to grief because fathers know when daughters have grown older without permission. "You sound like you've already lived through this," he murmured. My mouth went dry. For a second, I wanted to tell him everything. The van, the surgery, the photocopy shop, the rain. But Rebirth had given me a second life, not the right to place my nightmares on his shoulders. "I dreamed badly," I said. He touched my head with his rough palm. "Then wake fully now." That became a kind of blessing. At 1:15 p.m., while other students ate lunch with the exhausted relief of survivors, I sat in the administrative conference room with Inspector Vale, Principal Zhou, Mr. Kai, my parents, Leora, Madame Han, Yuna, and 2 other girls from the cleaning group. The air conditioner hummed too loudly. A glass pitcher of water sweated in the center of the table. No one drank. Meetings like that are built to make young people feel small. Long table, adult chairs, files stacked like walls. In my first life, I had entered such a room shaking and left it voiceless. This time, I placed my admission slips on the table before anyone asked. Old D19, newbie 07, timestamps printed, barcode defect circled. Then I placed my phone transcript beside them. Then, after asking Inspector Vale for permission, I played the corridor recording from my pencil case. The audio was not perfect. There was static, footsteps, a distant laugh. But Leora's voice came through clearly enough. "The strip is under D19. If they find it and she isn't sitting there, who do you think they'll ask?" Madame Han's face changed by 1 careful degree. Leora stared at the recorder like it had betrayed her personally. Principal Zhou closed his eyes. Mr. Kai whispered, "Dear God." Inspector Vale did not look surprised. She had probably expected something. Still, the recording did what evidence does best. It removed the fog in which powerful people hunt. Madame Han tried 3 strategies in 12 minutes. First, she questioned the legality of the recording. Inspector Vale replied that corridor conversations before exam entry were not exam content and could be submitted voluntarily to support an integrity investigation, though formal admissibility would be reviewed by the provincial board. Second, Madame Han questioned my motive. Why would a student record classmates unless she intended conflict? My mother, who had been silent until then, answered before I could. Why would a classmate plant material under my daughter's desk unless she intended harm? Her voice was quiet, but years of sewing had given her hands strength. Both were flat on the table, steady. Madame Han looked at my mother as if furniture had spoken. That look sealed something in me. I had wanted revenge for myself. Suddenly, I wanted it for every woman who had ever been treated as background until she resisted. Third, Madame Han tried pity. Leora was anxious. Leora was under pressure. Leora had misunderstood. Leora saw the strip and panicked. Leora copied because she feared May had cheated and wanted to verify the sequence. Inspector Vale let the speech run until Madame Han began believing her own smoke. Then she slid the overlay report forward. Candidate Han reproduced non-public decoy markers in a pattern beginning after her first recorded unauthorized reach. She also named the strip before officers disclosed its contents. Her corridor statement demonstrates prior knowledge of its location. Anxiety does not explain prior knowledge. It was surgical. No raised voice. Just one fact cutting after another until the performance had no skin left. Leora finally turned on her mother. That was pattern interruption 3, and no one saw it coming. You said it would be fine, she cried, not to the room, not to the inspectors, but directly at Madame Han. You said schools settle these things quietly. You said if there was no real answer key, it wasn't serious. Madame Han went still. The sentence landed harder than any accusation I could have made. Principal Zhou's head snapped up. Mr. Kai's pen froze. Yuna made a small choking sound. Leora realized too late what she had done. Her mother's eyes sharpened with a warning so cold, I felt it across the table. You are confused, Madame Han said. You are frightened and confused. But fear had cracked Leora's discipline, and once truth leaks, lies have to spend themselves plugging holes. No, Leora said, sobbing now for real, which looked nothing like her earlier tears. Real crying is ugly. It pulls the face apart. You said May's family couldn't fight it. You said her father needed the school contract. You said, enough, Madame Han snapped. One word, but it exposed the hierarchy. Inspector Vale lifted a hand, and the second officer began writing faster. I sat very still. There are moments when revenge stops feeling hot and becomes something almost solemn. I had spent years imagining Leora as the final boss of my suffering. But across that table, watching her mother's face close like a locked gate, I understood that Leora had learned cruelty at home the way other children learn table manners. That did not excuse her.
It explained the shape of the knife.
The principal attempted one last rescue, not of Leora, but of the school. Inspector, he said, sweating openly now, we fully support the investigation, of course. However, perhaps the students not directly involved could be spared further distress. Public knowledge of a cheating incident could affect the credibility of the examination center. Inspector Vale looked at him for so long that his sentence seemed to shrink in the air. Credibility is not preserved by concealment. I wrote that line in my memory. In my first life, credibility had been the idol they fed me to. Now the idol was being dragged into daylight. Vale continued, this center accepted student volunteers for hall preparation without adequate supervision. A desk was compromised. A candidate with a last-minute seat correction was not privately protected from peer interference. A parent council chair entered a restricted hall. These are not rumors. They are procedural failures. Principal Zhou looked older with every word. Mr. Kai lowered his head. I felt no pity for the principal, but Mr. Kai was more complicated. He had failed me once by being weak, not vicious. Weakness in adults is still dangerous to children. When Vale asked whether any teacher had shared preliminary seating lists with parent representatives, the room chilled. The preliminary list was not supposed to leave the office. Leora had known my seat 3 days early. Madame Han folded her hands. Principal Zhou swallowed. Mr. Kai whispered, the parent council requested logistics access for water distribution. Vale wrote that down too. Logistics. Such a clean word for opening the door. By sunset, the story had become too large for anyone to fold away. The provincial board suspended Leora's paper pending disqualification, sealed the hall records, and removed our school from hosting recommendation exams until review. Madame Han resigned from the parent council before the board could announce her removal, which fooled no one. Principal Zhou issued a notice about procedural irregularities that did not name students, but names move faster than notices. Everyone knew. The difference was that this time everyone knew in the correct direction. I expected triumph to feel loud. Instead, as I walked home between my parents, I felt hollowed out and clean, like a room after a storm has blown through and taken the rotten curtains with it. My phone buzzed constantly. Apologies from classmates who had believed Leora's sweetness without evidence in another life, though in this life they had only almost done so. Questions from students who smelled drama. A single message from Yuna. I told them everything. I did not reply immediately. Some apologies deserve acknowledgement. Some deserve time to prove they are not just fear-wearing manners. At home, my mother reheated soup. My father checked the door lock twice. None of us spoke about victory. We ate. That simple dinner felt more miraculous than applause. In my first life, that night had been the beginning of our family's long humiliation. In this life, my father complained that the soup needed salt. My mother told him his tongue had no culture, and I laughed so suddenly that both of them stared. Then my mother started crying, silently, into her bowl. My father pretended not to see because he was crying too. The next 3 days were not peaceful. People think exposing a lie ends the story, but exposure only changes the battlefield. Leora did not attend school, but her absence occupied every hallway. Some students defended her with the desperate loyalty of those who had built their identities around liking the right person. They said she had made one mistake. They said the exam system was too harsh. They said I was scary for recording her. They said changing my seat overnight was suspiciously clever, as if intelligence becomes immoral when used by the intended victim. I let them talk. The old May would have tried to answer every whisper, exhausting herself proving she deserved oxygen. The reborn May had learned economy. I answered only where the record mattered. When a class monitor asked whether I had baited Leora, I said, I corrected my admission slip through the official portal. I reported a compromised desk. She chose what to do with a sealed desk during an exam. Then I opened my textbook. When a teacher advised me to show generosity because Leora's future was at stake, I asked whether generosity had been part of the plan when my future was selected as the sacrifice. He had no answer. When an anonymous account posted that poor students were always scheming for sympathy, Ren, quiet 10th-ranked Ren, replied with a whole timeline, the integrity notice, and a single sentence. She sat in front. The desk was behind. Explain the physics. That became a meme by lunch. I should not have laughed. I laughed anyway. The board called me for a supplementary interview on April 20th. Not because they doubted me, Inspector Vale clarified, but because my original paper had been written under compromised conditions and they wanted a complete record for scholarship consideration. I wore my cleanest uniform. My mother braided my hair twice because her hands shook the first time. My father insisted on taking the bus with me even though the provincial office was only 6 stops away. In the waiting room, I saw Madame Han through a glass partition, speaking to a man in a gray suit. She looked smaller without the school corridor arranged around her. Leora sat beside her, face bare of makeup, eyes swollen. For 1 second, our gazes met. In my first life, I had wanted her to look sorry. Now I understood sorry was too small. She looked robbed, as if consequences had stolen something that belonged to her. That look cured the last childish part of me that wanted an apology. Some people do not regret harm. They regret losing the right to cause it safely. When my name was called, I stood. Leora whispered something I could not hear.
Madame Hangrit terrorist.
I walked into the interview room and found Inspector Vale seated with 2 board members. They asked about the barcode defect, the timing of my report, the corridor recording, and why I had not confronted Leora directly. I answered honestly. Because in a room where influence is uneven, confrontation becomes entertainment. I wanted documentation. One board member looked up sharply, then wrote that down. After the factual questions came a different kind. Miss Lin, the older board member, said, Your essay response argued that integrity requires systems, not simply good individuals. Was that answer influenced by the incident occurring around you? I thought carefully. In my first life, I had learned to fear careful answers because adults twisted them. In this life, carefulness belonged to me. Yes, I said. But not only today. Students are told that if we are honest, fairness will recognize us. That is not always true. Fairness has to be built. It has to have procedures that do not depend on who cries first, who has important parents, or who can afford a better lawyer. I used to think being innocent meant I would be safe. Now I think innocence without evidence is just a hope, and hope should not be the only protection a student has. The room went quiet. Inspector Vale's expression softened by a fraction. The older board member removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I wondered if I had said too much. Then he said, "That is a mature answer." I did not tell him maturity had cost me one lifetime. They gave me a supplementary logic exercise, a short ethics response, and a verbal reasoning set. I completed them steadily.
No desk tricks. No whispers.
No side cameras. Just questions and my own mind meeting them cleanly. When I left, Leora was gone. Madame Han was still behind glass, but she no longer looked at me as if I were furniture. She looked at me as if I were a locked door. The official results arrived on April 28th at 9 a.m. In my first life, I had hidden in my room while classmates posted rankings, my name absent like a missing tooth. In this life, I opened the portal at the kitchen table with my parents standing behind me pretending not to hover. Candidate Mei Lin. Written examination validated. Supplementary review completed. Provincial rank 2. Interview eligibility granted. My mother made a sound I had never heard before, half sob, half laugh, and covered her mouth. My father read the screen 3 times, then asked whether rank 2 is good enough because fathers who have been poor too long do not trust good news unless someone stamps it twice. I pointed at the interview eligibility line. He sat down heavily and cried into both hands. I did not cry at first. I looked at the word validated. Not excellent, not brilliant, not gifted. Validated. It was the word my 17-year-old self had needed more than any ranking. The board's separate notice stated that candidate Leora Han had been disqualified for examination misconduct, with a 2-year ban from provincial recommendation programs. Her mother was referred for investigation regarding unauthorized access to examination logistics. The school would undergo an external audit. The notice was formal, dry, bloodless.
Perfect.
Public punishment does not need fireworks. Sometimes the cleanest blade is administrative language. The interview took place in early May at the Capitol Foundation building, a place with glass walls and plants too green to be real. I had been there once in my first life, years later, to deliver printed brochures through the service entrance. I remembered looking at the students in the lobby and thinking they belonged to a species that had evolved without fear. Now I walked through the front doors wearing my own name tag. The panel asked about medicine, public health, rural clinics, family responsibility, and how I handled pressure. That last question almost made me smile. I told them pressure reveals systems as much as character. I spoke about my father's delivery injuries, my mother's informal work, the way families without money often meet healthcare only after problems become emergencies. I did not perform misery. I had learned that pain displayed for approval becomes another cage. I spoke plainly. One interviewer asked whether the recent exam incident had made me distrust institutions. No, I said. It made me distrust institutions that ask for trust while avoiding transparency. A good institution should not be offended by evidence. Inspector Vale was not on the panel, but I saw one interviewer glance at my file. By then, the incident had become a case study whispered through education offices. I was no longer merely the girl, almost framed. I was the girl who changed seats, documented the trap, and answered the ethics prompt while her enemy copied a decoy. Reputation, I discovered, could be rebuilt from the same materials used to bury you, if the foundation was evidence instead of pleading. Leora returned to school after 2 weeks, because wealthy families understand that disappearing can look like guilt and returning can be staged as resilience. She entered homeroom with no curls, no cardigan, no entourage except Yuna, who walked 3 steps behind looking like a prisoner of her own apology. The room went silent. Leora did not look at me. Mr. Kai began attendance too quickly. For a while, I thought she would avoid me forever, and I was content with that. But near the end of lunch, she found me in the old library aisle between chemistry guides and outdated atlases. Sunlight cut through the dust. She stood at one end of the aisle, thinner than before, but her eyes still carried that polished cruelty. "Are you satisfied?" she asked.
No greeting. No apology.
Just accusation wearing exhaustion. I closed the book in my hands. With rank 2? Mostly. Her mouth tightened. "You ruined my life." The old sentence. The thief's favorite lullaby. I looked at her, and, because we were finally alone without committees, cameras, mothers, or desks. I allowed myself one honest answer.
No, Liora.
I changed my seat number. You reached under a sealed desk. You copied answers you knew you weren't allowed to see. You accused me when you were caught. I didn't ruin your life. I stopped donating mine to it. Her eyes shone, but no tears fell. You think you're better than me now? No, I said. That's what scares you. I think I'm separate from you. She flinched. Strange, the words that wound. Not monster. Not cheater. Separate. For people like Liora, other people are tools, mirrors, ladders, threats. Separation is rebellion. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You don't know what my mother is like. That stopped me because it was the first true thing she had ever offered me without decoration. I could have used it to soften. Another version of me might have. The reborn version held the truth carefully without letting it become an excuse. Maybe I don't, I said. But I know what you are like when someone weaker is placed in front of you. Her jaw trembled. I was scared. So was I. You had nothing to lose. I laughed then, once, quietly, and the sound startled both of us. That is what people with too much always think. That if a family has little money, their future weighs less. I had everything to lose. You just didn't count it. The library aisles seemed to narrow around us. For the first time, Liora looked away. Not ashamed. Not fully. But struck. The desk was supposed to scare you, she whispered. It wasn't supposed to become this. It became exactly what it was, I said. A lie placed where adults would find it. She looked back at me with sudden hatred, perhaps because I had refused the comfort of misunderstanding. Enjoy your scholarship, May. People will get tired of your victim story. I picked up my book. Good. I'm tired of it too. I prefer my survival story. I walked past her before she could answer. My shoulder brushed hers lightly, and for once I did not shrink to avoid contact. Behind me, she made a sound like she wanted to call me back. I kept walking. The scholarship offer arrived in June. Capital Medical Foundation Preparatory Program, full tuition living stipend, interview score distinction. My mother read the letter aloud 3 times, mispronouncing foundation every time until we were laughing too hard to correct her. My father bought a cake from the expensive bakery near the bus station and pretended the price tag had fallen off by accident. Mr. Kai came by our apartment with a box of oranges and stood awkwardly in the doorway. He apologized, not for this life only, though he did not know that. I should have paid closer attention to the way students used kindness as cover, he said. I should have protected you before the inspectors had to. It was not a perfect apology. Perfect apologies are rare outside imagination. But it named the failure, and that mattered. I accepted the oranges. I did not absolve him. Those are different acts. The school audit later found that preliminary seating lists had been emailed to a parent council logistics group for 3 consecutive years. No one called it corruption in the notice. They called it improper access. Again, administrative language, clean blade. Principal Zhou was transferred. Madame Han's tutoring chain lost its school partnership. Liora completed the year quietly, her grades still good but no longer magical. Without borrowed proximity and protected rumors, she was clever, not untouchable. That distinction changed everything. On the last day before I left for the capital, I returned to the exam hall. It was empty, unlocked for summer cleaning. Sun lay across the floor in bright rectangles. The desks had been renumbered after the audit, but I found the old D19 stacked near the back wall, its label peeled away, one leg slightly uneven. It looked harmless. That almost made me angry. Objects that carry our nightmares should have the decency to look monstrous. I stood before it for a long time. In my first life, I had hated that desk as if wood could betray. In this life, I understood it had only held what people placed under it. A false strip, a red seal, a decoy, a story. I touched the edge, and the old fear rose, then passed. You were never unlucky, I told it softly. You were just watched too late. Footsteps sounded behind me. I turned, expecting a cleaner, but found Inspector Vale at the hall in trance with a folder under one arm. Miss Lin, she said, as if finding reborn girls speaking to furniture was ordinary. I was told you might be collecting your records. I straightened, embarrassed. She walked in and looked at the stacked desks. Evidence storage released that one yesterday. The school will dispose of it. Good, I said. She studied me. Do you know why your report worked? I thought of the email, the seat change, the recording. Because I was lucky enough to send it before they could remove the strip?
No, she said.
Because you described a procedure problem, not a personal feud. Systems can ignore feelings. They struggled to ignore documented risk. She handed me a copy of the validated examination report. Keep records, Miss Lin. Not because you should live defensively forever, but because truth deserves a body. Years later, people would tell the story incorrectly. That is what people do with stories that have sharp edges. They sand them down until they are comfortable to hold. They would say I tricked Leora. They would say I swapped seats with her. They would say the desk was cursed, that D19 ruined whoever touched it, that I had somehow known the answers before the exam because my final score was too high for a girl who had spent half her life studying under a flickering kitchen bulb. Some would turn me into a genius strategist, others into a cold-hearted schemer. Very few would say the plain version. A girl was going to be framed, so she moved into the light and documented the shadow. I learned to let wrong versions pass, when they did not matter. The official version mattered. My family's version mattered. My own version mattered most. In that version, I was not fearless. I was terrified from the moment I saw D19 on the mirror until the moment the board marked my paper valid. Courage did not feel like fire. It felt like checking timestamps with shaking hands. It felt like hugging my mother before she knew why. It felt like sitting at B07 and refusing to turn around while a girl behind me copied a desk into her own destruction. It felt like answering question 38 about circular arguments while my life tried to become one again. If you ask whether Rebirth made me kind, I will tell you the truth. It made me precise. Kindness without precision had been used to harvest me. Forgiveness without accountability had been offered to me as a gag. In my second life, I did not become cruel, though some people called me that because I stopped being convenient. I became exact. I learned the weight of a timestamp, the power of a clean sentence, the protection hidden inside boring procedures. I learned that villains do not always enter laughing with knives. Sometimes they arrive with curled hair, soft eyes, and messages about lucky seats. I learned that adults who say calm down often mean stop making the powerful uncomfortable. I learned that evidence is not colder than emotion. Evidence is emotion given a spine. Most of all, I learned that fate is not always changed by grand speeches or impossible miracles. Sometimes fate changes because at 11:41 p.m., a girl who has already lost everything once notices a barcode defect and presses correction request. The world does not roar. No stars fall. A printer somewhere wakes, a database shifts, and one seat number becomes another. D19 becomes B07. A trap becomes bait. A victim becomes a witness. A desk that was meant to fail me waits patiently for the girl who built it. On the morning I left for the capital, my mother tucked steamed buns into my bag until the zipper protested, and my father carried my suitcase down 3 flights of stairs though his back still complained in rain. At the bus station, the announcement speakers crackled, people pushed, children cried, and the whole world seemed beautifully indifferent to the fact that I had once died before reaching this place. My mother fussed with my collar. My father gave me an envelope with emergency cash folded so carefully, it looked ceremonial. Don't trust everyone, he said. My mother hit his arm. Don't scare her. I smiled. I won't trust everyone. I also won't fear everyone. That satisfied them both poorly, which is how parental advice usually ends. As the bus pulled away, I looked through the window at their shrinking figures and felt the strange ache of receiving a future twice. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. For 1 second, my body remembered the old fear. Then I opened it. It was from Yuna. I don't expect forgiveness, it said. I just wanted you to know I transferred schools and gave a full statement to the board. I'm trying to become someone who doesn't keep watch for harm. I read it twice. Then I typed good.
Keep going.
Not forgiveness. Not friendship. A direction. Outside, the city loosened into highway, and the sky ahead was a clear, merciless blue. At the foundation dormitory, my new desk had no number taped to it. It was plain, pale wood, facing a window that overlooked ginkgo trees and a courtyard where students argued about coffee prices. I ran my hand under it before unpacking, not because I expected a strip, but because the body remembers what the mind has survived. Nothing was there. No tape, no folded paper, no trap waiting in the shadow. I sat down and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote 3 columns. Things I know, things I can prove, things I will build. Under the first, I wrote my name. Under the second, I wrote my records. Under the third, I paused for a long time. Then I wrote a life no one else gets to number for me. That night, while other girls called home or arranged their skincare bottles on shared shelves, I studied anatomy until midnight. It was not glamorous. There was no applause, no enemy watching, no camera overhead. Just me, a lamp, a textbook, and the quiet privilege of effort that would not be stolen before morning. For years, I had thought revenge would be the moment Leora fell. I was wrong. Revenge was this: a silent room in a new city, my parents safe, my name clean, my future difficult for ordinary reasons. Somewhere behind me, D19 had become scrap wood. Somewhere behind me, Leora was learning that consequences have longer memories than admirers. Somewhere ahead, patients I had not met yet were waiting for the doctor I might become. I turned the page. Still, on some nights, I dreamed of the exam hall. Not the whole day, never in order. Dreams are poor editors. Sometimes I saw only Leora's hand reaching under the sealed desk, fingers pale against old gum marks. Sometimes I heard Inspector Vale say recorded, and the word echoed like a bell down a corridor with no end. Sometimes I was back in my first life, standing accused, except when I opened my mouth. No sound came, and every adult at the table wore my own face. I would wake with my heart racing and my dorm room dark around me. On those nights, I did not tell myself to calm down. Calm had never saved me. Instead, I turned on the lamp, opened my file box, and looked at the documents until the past returned to its proper size. Approved correction request. Integrity report. Validated score. Scholarship offer. My mother's badly spelled note tucked between them. We believed you before paper, but paper helped foolish people catch up. I loved her for that sentence. Then I would breathe, drink water, and study a little, because building a life is the slowest and most stubborn answer to anyone who tried to erase you. Trauma wanted me circling D19 forever. I chose B07, then the capital, then the next page, then the next. The last time I saw Leora was not dramatic either. It was almost 3 years later, in the lobby of a hospital where I was volunteering during winter break. She stepped out of the elevator wearing a visitor badge, carrying a bouquet wrapped in expensive paper. For a second, we both became 17 again. Then the lobby noise returned. Wheels of a gurney, a nurse calling for a chart, someone arguing softly near billing. Leora looked different. Not humbled exactly. People like her do not become simple moral lessons just because they lose once. But the shine had worn off her certainty. She saw my volunteer coat, my ID, the anatomy notes under my arm. May, she said. My name sounded unfamiliar in her mouth without poison. Leora. She glanced toward the ward doors. My mother is having surgery. I nodded. There were many things I could have said, sharp things, symmetrical things, lines that would have pleased an audience. But hospital lobbies are not stages. Pain enters them honestly, even when carried by dishonest people. I hope the surgery goes well, I said. She looked at me, searching for mockery. Finding none seemed to unsettle her more than cruelty would have. Do you still hate me? She asked. I thought about D19, the strip, my father's van in another life, the photocopy shop rain. I thought about B07, my mother's soup, the validated report, the notebook on my dorm desk. No, I said finally. I keep records. I don't keep you. Her face tightened, but she nodded once. Then she walked toward the ward, and I walked toward the clinic, our paths crossing without tangling. That more than any punishment felt like freedom. So this is my testimony, if anyone ever asks how seat number can change a life. It was never just a number. D19 was the place they assigned to the version of me who believed fairness would arrive if she waited politely. B07 was the place I chose when I understood fairness sometimes needs directions, documents, witnesses, and a girl willing to be disliked before she is believed. Leora thought luck lived in a desk. She thought my work could be copied, my fear could be predicted, my poverty could be used as a leash. She thought a planted strip under old wood would become a grave with my name on it. Instead, she copied the desk that failed her badly, not because the desk was cursed, but because it had finally been watched. And I, who had once died with blank answer sheets scattering in the rain, lived long enough to learn that the best revenge is not becoming someone else's nightmare. It is waking from your own, changing the seat, sitting in the light, and writing until the bell rings.